We are on number 4 of a 4-part series that I titled, Do You Want to Get Well? And I really have truly enjoyed these 4 weeks, and I hope you have too. And I will let you know that the Lord is working on me now with something else that will likely be turned into some sermon a year from now. And so my pain will be your gain next year. But that's good. It's good that he's working on you, working on me. And if I ask you that question, what's he working on you about, you should probably have something. So if you don't have an answer, you better ask him, what do you want to do with me next, Lord? I will take a little time to review these past 3 weeks. It won't be super lengthy, but I just kind of want to bring everybody up to speed about what we've talked about. And this series started to stir in me about a year ago, and I was battling an issue in my body, and I was drawn to the title of a message called I've Tried Everything, and that was how I felt. And the issue I was dealing with was plantar fasciitis in my feet, and I realized that isn't like a life-threatening condition or anything like that, but it sure got in my way for a long time. If you've ever injured your feet or had pain in your feet or not been able to walk and get yourself places, it's not a fun thing to deal with for a long period of time. And so the main text of the message was from John 5, and that was about the lame man at the pool of Bethesda. And when I heard this preacher in the message read through it, it like just went off at me. It was like fireworks. And I believed at that time that when the Lord was showing that to me, that it was because I was going to share that with all of you. I was going to turn this into a message. And it took a while before I realized that he was talking to me. He was saying those words to me, do you want to get well? He wasn't interested in me teaching it to anybody else at that time. So I spent the first week of the series going through that text verse by verse, and we will read it. And then I shared my story about what I had to do to get well, the things that I needed to change in my spirit, the things I needed to work on in my soul. And it wasn't just about the recommended physical treatments that you needed to do to take care of this issue in my feet. And so what I realized in this process was that I had really walked away from my first love. I realized there were things in my life I was struggling to let go of, that I wasn't very good at asking for help or letting people support me. And I decided then with the series to kind of take a week on each item, spirit, soul, and body. And while I want you to understand how integrated they are, I'm trying to share a few points on each of those parts of who we are. And so week 2, I spent some time talking about the ways we might be spiritually sick and what we can do to change that. And then last week, we did something called soul surgery. So are you guys recovering from your surgery from last week? Soul surgery, I talked about emotions. So let's go ahead and I'm gonna review a little bit more, but let's read that core scripture from John 5. This is from the Message translation, so each week we've kind of been going through this. It says, soon another feast came around, and Jesus was back in Jerusalem. Near the sheep gate in Jerusalem, there was a pool in Hebrew called Bethesda with 5 alcoves. Hundreds of sick people, blind, crippled, paralyzed, were in these alcoves. One man had been an invalid there for 38 years, and when Jesus saw him stretched out by the pool and knew how long he had been there, he said, do you want to get well? The sick man said, sir, when the water is stirred, I don't have anybody to put me in the pool. By the time I get there, somebody else is already in. And Jesus said to this man, get up, take your bedroll, start walking. And the man was healed on the spot. He picked up his bedroll and walked off. And so I know sometimes with the different translations, the words are a little bit different. But when he said, get up, I have shared these past weeks that word really means to rise or awaken. Then he said, take up, and that means to loose or put away. And then he said to start walking, and that word meant to live or to go. So we've taken those 3 steps, each message, and said, how can we apply that? So we did that with spirit, we did that with soul, and then we're going to go ahead and do that tonight. And so I'm challenging everybody to kind of look at things a bit outside of the box, and that maybe if you have issues of sickness and dysfunction in your body, it isn't always just about your body. Sometimes it's about your soul. Or sometimes when you have things going on in your soul, it might be because there's something you're not addressing in your spirit or whatever. They all work together. But yet I think sometimes we just tend to get a little narrow in our thinking. And so sometimes we have symptoms in other parts of our self. So 2 core things that I shared that I want you to remember is that you have to believe that broken things can be fixed and broken people can be whole. Woohoo, that deserves a shout, doesn't it? Who's been broken before? Yeah. And we also have to remember that Jesus Christ and his word are the method to get us to be whole in all 3 of these areas. So when I talked about spiritual wholeness and we went through the, what do we need to awaken to our current spiritual state? Are we spiritually dead or dying? Are we spiritually alive? Or are we spiritually whole and thriving? And that we needed to put away some wrong understandings. The things we had to loose were a wrong understanding of who God is. That he's not a punishing God, that he does care about your day-to-day life. Putting away a wrong understanding of what God wants from us and a wrong understanding of how he wants us to live. And then I talked about the 3rd step, which was to walk, and that we are to share the gospel, be a disciple, be his follower, be an example of his love, and to pursue God's plan for your life and go about his business with everything that you've got. And then last week we talked, as I said, mostly about the soul, about our emotions, and I showed some scientific stuff, but also talked about how emotions are stored in our bodies. If we don't process them, we can become what I said, emotionally fat. Emotionally fat. So we need to learn to metabolize our emotions to avoid sickness in our soul and avoid sickness in our bodies. And so I specifically talked about shame, that I feel like especially in Christian circles, we probably could be experiencing shame and we just don't know what it is and don't feel like we can talk about different things maybe in our life or from our past. I talked about grief, and I talked about anger and unforgiveness. And then the things that we needed to do in order to live and move on was to cry out to God, do some exercise. We're talking about physical movement and its connection with moving our emotions in the same way, journaling and meditation. And then that we needed to talk to the Lord and make sure he continues to reveal to us what it is that we need to keep working on, basically. Like, Lord, show me areas in my heart or in my emotions or in my soul that still need a little bit of work so I can be emotionally well. And I used a term also about having good emotional hygiene. That you might spend 45 minutes getting yourself ready in the mirror, but you'll walk out of the door with like a bad attitude, and we don't really take time for emotional hygiene on a daily basis. So tonight we're on our final portion about the body, and I mentioned I wasn't going to be talking about diet and exercise. Aren't you excited? Because don't you hear about that like all the time from every direction, everywhere you go? And I'm on the keto diet and I'm a vegan, and you need to do HIIT training and you need to do interval training, and there's so much stuff. So I'm not talking about that. Those are things that are important. I don't want to minimize that. And we will have a little overlap of things tonight that we've also learned over the previous week because all 3 of these are integrated, as I said. So, and I will wrap up referring back some to the original story of my journey that I shared in the first week that I was here. So when I was kind of praying about this, I'm like, Lord, how do I, this was probably like the hardest week to kind of get his heart on what he wanted me to share about the body. And I just started to go like, why are so many people dealing with, physical illness? Why are there always so many people in healing lines? Like, what is it that we're not getting or ignoring? And I do think, the emotional piece that I shared last week is a big portion. But then he reminded me of this word, and he said stress. Like stress. Okay, so I thought on that for a while, stress. And stress is an issue that I don't think just comes from like one part of us. You can feel stressed, can't you, in every area of your life? You feel it in your body. I think our bodies reap the majority of the consequences of having stress in our life. And so I pulled a couple interesting statistics. So once he kind of said stress, I'm like, let's look at this. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration estimates that stress costs American industries more than $300 billion annually. And studies show that 3 out of 4 doctors' visits are due to stress-related ailments and complaints. According to the American Institute of Stress in the US, this is just in the US, 77% of people regularly experience physical symptoms caused by stress. And 73% experience psychological symptoms caused by stress. And then they kind of started to ask people, well, what causes your stress? What are the biggest stressors in your life? And 76% cited money and work as the leading cause of their stress. And when they asked more about work, it was usually related to work overload. And it just reminded me, like, here we are again, back at this culture of doing, do some more. And so those were just like a few statistics. I could go like on and on, but the point I'm trying to make is that chronic stress is something that the devil is using to kill, steal, and destroy our bodies, and we're just kind of playing along with it. Now, it's not possible to live stress-free. I don't know anybody that could say, I live a stress-free life. We were built for episodes of stress. The Bible tells us that we're going to have storms, right? We're going to have challenges. We're going to come up against things. And so God created us with systems in place to be able to handle that. He's not going to tell you, I'm going to bring storms, but I'm not going to give you the skills or the ability to deal with it. He built us to handle situations of what is called acute stress, which is like short term. So every week I give you a little bit of a science lesson. So here comes your science lesson a little bit. Stress is a physiological response, so that means it's happening in your body. It's a physiological response that heightens awareness and prepares the body to confront or flee a perceived threat. You've probably heard that term fight or flight, right? Your fight or flight system kicks in. And so when stress is encountered and that fight or flight kicks in, this chain reaction occurs in your body and it releases a surge of hormones. So adrenaline, who's ever had their heart pumping from adrenaline? You know what I'm talking about? Adrenaline, cortisol. And so when adrenaline's going, like your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, you get this boost of energy. Cortisol increases sugars in the bloodstream, and that enhances your brain's use of sugar and increases the availability of the tissue repairing substances, and then it kind of curbs the non-essential functions. So basically it suppresses all your like non-essential functions and gets your body and your energy all gathered up to deal with that like stress or that thing that you are facing. So that's how we were created. And in an ideal world, after stress has passed, hormone levels drop to a normal level, body functions return like to their baseline levels, but when stress becomes chronic, that fight or flight process remains activated. So that means all those things that I just talked about continue day after day after day after day after day, after week, after month. That's where we get to some issues in our body. And so we were built for episodes of acute stress, but we weren't built for chronic stress. So we have to, of course, be diligent to renew our minds and use that good emotional hygiene I talked to you about last week, and use it to limit our stressors, to cope with stressors. But we can't eliminate the soul from this discussion either, right? The soul's kind of connected here. But many people are dealing with chronic stress, and it's one of the biggest factors impacting sickness and disease in our bodies, if you just look at statistics from the medical world. So I want to walk through those 3 steps from John 5 that we've done every week. And so that first one, you should remember these by now, is get up, right? And that means awaken. So I like to call this the get honest with yourself step. Get honest with yourself. It's not always fun to do, is it? Yeah. So we have to awaken and go, oh my gosh, how stressed out am I? Am I living in this state of chronic stress, and what are the sources of it? And so I'm going to talk about 2 categories that I think are some of the biggest stressors that contribute to this in our life as Christians, but this is not an exhaustive list. And what stresses me out might not stress you out, right? So we're all individuals. But I think we can all identify with these categories. So the first one I'm going to talk about is about being busy and out of balance. And the second one I'm going to talk about is poor boundaries. So I came across this clip from the New York Times, and I thought it was a really interesting metaphor. It says, you can feel like a tin can surrounded by a circle of 100 powerful magnets. Many people are excessively busy because they allow themselves to respond to every magnet, tracking too much data, processing too much information, answering to too many people, taking on too many tasks, all in the sense that this is the way that they must live in order to keep up and stay in control, but it's really the magnets that have control. One way to wrestle back control is to take a hard look at our priorities, to decide what matters. This does not necessarily mean big career changes or moving from one state to the other. It can also be just figuring out small but significant ways of how to scale down from frantic to manageable. Ever felt frantic? I think of that image in my head of frantic, and you just see the look on their face, and their hair is all crazy, and they're running around. And I've had a chance in over time to talk with a lot of frantic people, and it seems like it's almost like a status thing to be busy. Say hey, well, what does your week look like? Well, I have to work 10 hours every day this week, and then I'm going to book club, the book club, and then I have, a meeting at my kids' school, and then I got to rush over to the other side of, town, and I have my daughter's swim meet, and on Wednesday I have to volunteer at church, and then, oh my gosh, my son has a soccer tournament the entire weekend, and that's 40 miles away, and so I'm going to be on the soccer field all weekend. Does that sound like anybody's life? Or somebody if it's not you? And it's almost as if we think people will think that we are important or that we're a good parent because our kids are involved in so many activities. And so that must mean that they're good kids and I'm a good parent. And of course, there's nothing wrong with any of these individual activities, right? Activities for our kids are good. It keeps them out of trouble. They teach kids about teamwork, and they learn a lot of valuable skills. But where it goes wrong is if you have no time for rest and refreshing. And now we're teaching our kids that lifestyle because they're watching us run around like crazy people. So I feel like busyness can be its own addiction, and it's driven by our need to find identity and feel good about ourselves. But is that where we're supposed to get our identity and feel good about ourselves? Where do we get that? In Christ, right? And so if my child gets straight A's, that means I'm a good parent. If I volunteer at church weekly, then that means I'm a good Christian. If I work 50 plus hours a week, then that means I'm a good employee. And of course, all of those things, there's times for that. We want to encourage, right, our kids to get good grades. And sometimes you have to go over and above and be a good employee. But if it's about feeding your identity, that's not right. So if I do blank, then I'm a good blank, and that's what your identity has become. No, that's not what God wants from us. So many of us are so out of balance. I've had periods of being out of balance, and balance is a tough thing to master because we need to take care of ourselves, but yet we learn to value others above ourselves. We're told to be good stewards for our bodies with exercise, but yet we hear about needing to give our body a rest. We get advice to enjoy our kids while they're young and they're still in our house and you want to support them. But then you're told, don't make your kids the center of the universe. We're taught to be good employees and go the extra mile and work hard, but yet we're not supposed to let our jobs be our top priority. How the heck do we figure this all out? Has anybody else ever wondered that? How can I juggle and balance all of this? So it's really easy to become too busy and out of balance and feel like that tin can that I described with all these magnets just pulling on you, pulling on you, pulling on you. So for me, business or busyness looked like being a pastor here at Living Word. I worked for Weight Watchers once a week. I decided several years ago to be a Tupperware consultant just to earn some extra fun money because I like to mess around in the kitchen. I would volunteer and help with special events here at church. I was trying to keep up with a fitness routine at the gym. I tended to host holidays and dinner parties. And then I was still trying to be a wife, a mom, a daughter, a friend. All those things are good, right? There isn't anything I read off there that aren't like good things. They all impact people. And I rationalized all of them that way. And that's why they were good and they all needed to stay in my life. You know, part of it is like prideful, like, well, what's the Weight Watchers group going to do without me, you know? Like, what are these people going to do without me? I mean, how ridiculous is that really when you think about it? But I rationalized it in the sense of like, I'm impacting people, I'm sowing love into people, and I was. But ultimately, these things pulled me away from what God's priorities were for me. It contributed to me moving away from my first love, which is what I talked about a couple weeks ago. It contributed to me not having as much time to spend with my family as I would have liked. All of a sudden, my kids are 14 and 16. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't have much time left with them. So in order to truly evaluate where you are with this issue, you might be sitting here going, this isn't my issue. You have to ask yourself, what are your priorities really? Where do you invest time, energy, and money? And you can say that you have your priorities right, but once again, where do you invest your time, your energy, and your money? Does it line up with God's priorities for you or what He's spoken to your heart? You know, our pastor, Pastor Mac, has taught us well about our priorities and what they should be. And so I know for some of you it will be a reminder. And I knew these priorities, but that doesn't mean I was honest with myself about how I was spending my time and my energy and my money. So number one is what? Our personal relationship with God. That's got to be at the top of the list. And it's so easy to push that aside because it doesn't maybe feel urgent. It doesn't feel as urgent as some other things that we face physically every day. Number two, if you're married, would be your spouse. Number three would be like your kids and your family. Number four would be your job. And number five then would be like any additional ministry or volunteering that you do. And so it'd be interesting if you just took like a little journal, a little log, and track how do you use your time. Just do it for a week. You might be surprised. So in my path to healing and wellness, I had to let some things go. I had to be more realistic about how many times I could be at the gym and just go, guess what? You're 45. You're not going to look like you're 19 no matter how hard you work at the gym. Some of you maybe need to have that light bulb. It's just not happening. I had to realize that working in ministry and having one job was enough, and I had to give up my side gigs. And so I made a decision that if I took something new on, I would give something up. And it forced me then to really seek the Lord and let Him guide me in what He wanted me to do. And is this what he wanted me to do at this phase in my life? Sometimes there's just things that he brings into our life for a season, right? Or a phase. So what I was doing with Weight Watchers or whatever, I believe it was meant to be for that season, and the season was over. And so I don't want you to go like, oh, I did this wrong, or I shouldn't have done that, or I didn't hear from God. Not necessarily. It might just be it's meant to be a season of time in your life. It could be a good thing, but maybe just not a good thing for you right now. So we have to seek the Lord, see if what we are doing is what he would have us to be doing. If you have no time to spend with him, then something has to change. If your marriage is failing because you're always at soccer tournaments, basketball tournaments, baseball tournaments, whatever other activities, if your marriage is failing because of that, then something needs to change. That's out of whack. When you stand before the Lord someday, is he going to say to you, I really wish you would have been more busy? He's not. Most of us need to scale back. Our schedules are too demanding, and we're living in this chronic stress, which is slowly destroying our bodies. And so, as usual, I don't have the formula, but the Holy Ghost knows the most. And so, just like how the Lord directed me in some things, He will do the same for you. But from a practical side, a good question would just be to ask yourself, why? Why am I doing this thing or that thing? Am I doing this thing to make somebody else happy? Am I doing this thing because I'm just too afraid to tell them that I quit? That's not the right reason. That's not the right reason. You might be in a position or a place for the wrong reason, and you're preventing the right person from getting there. I don't know if you've ever thought about it that way. You're like, oh, I'm hanging around because what are they going to do without me? You maybe have thought that too. I can't leave because what are they going to do without me? But when you think about how you might be preventing God's plan from working in somebody else's life, you take on a different perspective. Everybody say this: life is not about me. Life is not about me. So that's going to kind of wrap up the busyness thing. We could talk about that a lot. Another thing I think we need to be honest about and awaken to is that we might have poor boundaries in one or more areas. And so you might go, oh, Treena, there you go into one of those counseling topics again, boundaries. It's not a counseling topic, it's a human topic. And we don't want to feel like this tin can being pulled by all these magnets. So this could be like 2-3 weeks of teachings for me. I like this topic. And it's kind of a buzzword, boundaries. I got to have better boundaries. And you can go read all the boundaries books by Townsend and Cloud. I'm sure we got a few in the bookstore. And they're really good. But Jesus is our example, and he exhibited boundaries regularly. If you really start to study his life, he did. And boundaries are like a personal property line, and it says like, these are the things I'm responsible for on this side of the boundary, and the things over here on that side, I'm not responsible for. So then the question becomes, what am I responsible for? When our loved ones are mad, is it our job to fix their mood? It isn't. But sometimes that's what we try to do. When our coworkers procrastinate and then they ask us to put in extra time so they can meet their deadline, do you help them out? When family drama is going on in the distance, do you get sucked in? They're all different types of scenarios where we need to set boundaries. And when we have poor boundaries, we're constantly feeling exhausted because people can suck the life out of us. Do you know some of those people? I can suck the life out of you. And if you want to identify where you have poor boundaries, ask yourself that question. What things and what people are the most exhausting to me? Are there like names that pop up on your phone, and when you see it, you like roll your eyes back and go, oh gosh, I'm not taking this call. Maybe you need to have a conversation. Are there events that you keep getting invited to that you look for any excuse not to go? We all have these decisions to make. And I started to think about Jesus. I'm like, can you imagine the constant demand on Jesus? I mean, a lot of it is written about in the Bible, but there's a lot that isn't. How many dinner invites do you think Jesus got every day? How many will you come heal my blanks do you think Jesus got every day? It's like, you can't tell me he didn't manage concerns and complaints and drama between his disciples. That they didn't bicker once in a while, or one's going, I'm going to punch you, no, I'm going to punch you. He had to set boundaries. And many times the Bible talks about him going off to pray and be alone with his Father. He had to say no and kind of close up shop for the day so he could go and pray and rest and be refreshed, because guess what? Tomorrow it's the same grind again. And so we're trying to navigate, what am I responsible for? What am I not responsible for? Where do I draw the line in helping? Because we're supposed to help and we're supposed to serve, but when is it too much? I have a couple scripture verses. Let's go to the Word. That's a good place to go for some understanding. This is Galatians 6:2. It's the Amplified Classic version. It says, bear, endure, and carry one another's burdens and troublesome moral faults, and in this way fulfill and observe perfectly the law of Christ and complete what is lacking in your obedience to it. If you look up the word burden in the Greek, it's described as an excess burden. And this is like a load that is so heavy that it weighs us down. It's something that's too big to bear. We wouldn't have the strength or maybe the resources to carry this load by ourselves. And it's, maybe think of it like a boulder that could crush you. And so a burden is something that we do need help with carrying. And it's usually things in like a time of crisis or tragedy, right? If you've known somebody that's maybe lost a loved one or they've gotten sick, and it's like just too much to keep up with the kids and work and the meals. And so there are things like that that feel like boulders, that for that time of crisis, the right godly thing to do is, if we can help, is to help. But then if you keep going in Galatians 6:5, Amplified Classic again, it says, for every person will have to bear, be equal to, understanding, and calmly receive his own little load of oppressive faults. And if you look at that word load, that means like cargo or task. And that's basically about just the everyday tasks and toils that we all have responsibility for. If the first one I talked about was a boulder, this one's more like a backpack. And so everybody has the ability to carry their own little backpack. And we are expected to carry our backpack. So here's where the problems come in. I'll probably read this twice so it can sink in a little. It says, problems arise when people act as if their boulders are daily loads and refuse help from others. That was me. And when people act like their daily loads are boulders that they shouldn't have to carry. I'm going to read that one again. Problems arise when people act as if their boulders are daily loads and they refuse help from others. And when people act like their daily loads are boulders that they shouldn't have to carry. So is this you? Are you overly busy, overly burdened, out of balance, no boundaries? Are you still doing your 30-year-old son's laundry? Quit carrying his backpack. That's our goal as parents, is to teach our kids how to live independently and carry their own backpack, so you don't have to carry their backpack anymore. And the stress associated with this can be killing you. You have enough of your own laundry to do. So really, what a tactic that the devil uses to kill, steal, and destroy. He somehow convinces us to run ourselves ragged, all in the name of good things, and we're like doing this to ourselves. So what does setting good boundaries look like? Oh my gosh, we could go into a whole long list of things here, but we're just going to practice one really quick. Setting good boundaries can look like this. I'm going to spell a word and then you're going to say it. Are you ready? N-O. 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 No, we're not very good at saying no. Oh my gosh, and so many of our boundary issues can simply be solved with a no. And no doesn't have to be mean, and no doesn't have to be in a snotty tone of voice, like, no way. Just, no, I really, am feeling stretched this week, or that's just not really something I can help you with. Sometimes we can direct them to the place they can be helped, like, oh, but I know about this great support group, or no, I can't help you with that. This is beyond me. You need to see a therapist. Or sometimes it's just my plate is full. I can't add any more to it. Nothing personal against you, but N-O, no. Before you leave tonight, I might have you say that again. No. That will be your one tip. There's a whole bunch more, but just work on that one. N-O, no. All right, so that was step one, the things we had to kind of awaken to and be honest with ourselves and go, are we hooked on this busyness thing because it makes us feel good about ourselves? Are we way out of balance to the point that we don't have time for our relationship with God, our relationships are failing, we're physically sick sometimes from the stress of everything, and poor boundaries. So our number 2 step was to loose or to put away. So those are like, what are the things that we now have to dump? What do we have to drop so we don't go back to that old way of living? And the first one I wanted to talk about was having a performance-based identity. And many people know this about themselves already, but others don't. And there is nothing wrong, right, with trying to be excellent. We're called to be excellent. There's nothing wrong with working hard to succeed, but it goes back once again to the motivation. Are you striving in your own strength, or are you being empowered by the Holy Spirit to do what God's called you to do and the things that He's called you to do to walk out His plan? So a performance-based identity sounds like this. I must meet certain standards to feel good about myself. Maybe it's about work success. Maybe it's about family success. Maybe it's about financial status, public recognition. If I drive this car, if I live in this neighborhood, if I get this degree, it's going to be different for different people. And once again, none of those things are bad or wrong or sinful, but if you are finding your identity in those things instead of who you are in Christ, you have now entered the problem zone. You might say, why am I like this? Why am I like this? Why do I do this? And I actually listened to a cool sermon by Stephen Furtick, and he said, anytime you have unbelief in your heart, it will cause you to try to perform to prove something that you don't really believe. So when we find ourselves performing, it's because there's something in our heart that we don't believe. And when people with a performance-based identity fail, it's kind of like failure equals worthlessness. That's one of their core beliefs. Failure equals worthlessness. So then you either become so fearful of failing again that you're just hopeless and you stop trying, or you might start to perform even more. Okay, I failed. I got to do better next time. And you just kick into the next gear in regards to performance. Have any of you heard of the imposter syndrome? Okay. You'll have to Google that and read more about it later. The imposter syndrome is that deep down, many of us feel like that we're a fraud. It happens to mothers, fathers, leaders. People are like, oh, you're such a good mom. And you're thinking, I don't know what the heck I'm doing, right? So it's the fear of being found out to be less than what they think you are. You feel like an imposter, like if they really knew. And so that fear keeps you in performance mode because I have to prove to them I really am what they think that I am, even though deep down I'm really insecure and I don't think I am that at all. And most everybody deals with it. I think about that when they said, okay, you're going to be a pastor. And it was like this fear came upon me, like, oh my gosh. And I sometimes say to myself, like, there's so much in the Bible you don't know about. What if Pastor Matt gave you a Bible quiz? Would you pass? Would they really let you be a pastor if they knew that you didn't pray in tongues every day for an hour? Would they really let you be a pastor if they knew every once in a while when you're really angry, you've said the F word? Would they, you just like go through this. And bottom line, that imposter syndrome is like, if they really knew me, they wouldn't let me do blank. And so a performance-based identity is about striving. It's about do. And then you do some more. And then you achieve. So more people will think that you have value. And once again, this drives us into chronic stress, and we are killing ourselves trying to impress other people. We are called to live out of purpose and not for popularity. We're called to live out of purpose and not for the praises of men. We're called to live out of purpose and not trying to prove something. And so if we're living for popularity and praise and proof, those things don't come from God. And so we have to be honest. This isn't like fun stuff to admit, because this comes from people, sometimes pressure from people. It comes from our culture that's all about doing and performing and achieving. And why can't we get to that place of just saying, it's enough to know that Jesus says that we're set apart, that we're his child, that we are royalty, that we're chosen. It's kind of like we just set those things aside and go, that doesn't really mean as much as this achievement over here. And so many people are literally killing themselves by performing, doing. And overcoming this is not an easy task. It's not like you can walk out of here tonight and go, oh, I'm just going to change that, and it's going to be different tomorrow. It's going to be a process. You have to retrain your brain from a lifetime of thinking and start focusing on who you are, whose you are, and not what you do. Joyce Meyer was always popular for saying that, right? Your who is not in your do. At least that's the first person I heard say it many years ago. Your who is not in your do. If we look at John, this is John 15:5 from the New Living Translation. It says, yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do what? Nothing. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Think about that. You could be spending 15 hours of your day busy, doing, and it's nothing in God's eyes if you're doing it apart from him. Ugh. Ouchie. I had to realize that about myself, even here working in ministry. That'd be easier to say, I'm doing all these good things for the Lord. Save this drug addict's life or whatever it might be. But if I'm not including him in that process and he's not a part of what I'm doing, it's nothing. Oh, I put ouch right in my notes. Ouch. So connected to this performance-based identity is the possibility that you're what I would call an approval addict. And I've talked about this before in past sermons, but this is about being overly concerned with being liked by everyone. So you'll say yes to things you don't want to so someone will like you. You'll act in ways not consistent with your character so someone will be your friend. You become a chameleon and you just kind of change based on who you're around so someone will like you. So you need to hear this. You will never be liked by everyone. Do you like everyone? No. But yet sometimes we think everybody should like us. So we're working hard to gain the acceptance and the approval of everyone. That is so exhausting. And you're living an inauthentic life, you're people-pleasing, and that is really stressful. Can never make everybody happy. So you're spending all this time and effort in things that really have no eternal value. And so please don't take this out of context and just not be considerate of people. Just go, oh, I don't please people, and so you're going to be a jerk to everybody. That's not it. People find loopholes. We have to be really good at living free to close up all the loopholes, because they'll find a loophole. God loves you. God accepts you. That is what matters. And people are important. I'm not saying people aren't important. And God uses people. But this addiction about being liked by everyone needs to be loosed so you can be free. So I joke about like young people and social media. And, you know, I watched my oldest daughter always like, go out and like my picture, you know, and this got this many likes. And I used to just, you know, kind of laugh about that. And it somehow, you know, makes them feel worth and makes them feel approved of when their social media posts have likes or they have this many followers. And I joked about that with my daughter. But then as I was writing this, the Lord kind of said to me, well, what about you? I caught myself going on the Living Word YouTube channel to see how many views I got on my sermons. So while part of it was, yes, there's genuine excitement that I want this message to spread, and I'm, you know, excited if a lot of people, you know, hear it, I have to be really, really honest and say there was a part of me that was like, oh, I got more views than so-and-so did. You know, and I kind of could get into that cycle, like, does that make me better than that person? No, I could have had 2 views, or 3 people could sit in the sanctuary, but if what I said changed those 3 people's lives, I should feel good about that. Amen. So all of us kind of do this. I don't know if you like to admit it or not, but there are things like this that we have to loose in order to reduce this chronic stress in our life. And so there's more things than that, but I always just pick a couple to share with you. So we got to stop the, you know, approval addiction and the performance-based identity. Those are 2. Step 3 on here was about to walk. This means to live. Like, okay, what are we going to do now? Now we kind of had some awareness. I'm like, okay, yes, I'm too busy. Yes, I have poor boundaries. I need to start saying no more. I'm going to work on this performance-based thing. And you're kind of like, okay, I've done those things. Now what next? What does it mean to live this way? And the Lord spoke very clearly to me about this one, and it was about the word rest. Rest. The cure for this lifestyle of stress is learning how to rest in every sense of the word, spirit, soul, body. Rest. I wanted to read from Matthew 11. This is 28 through 30 from the Message translation. It says, are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. When those questions are asked at the beginning, are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out? A lot of us could probably shake our heads and go, yep. He says, come to me. Get away with me. I'll give you back your life. Keep company with me. I'll let you live freely and lightly. So I started to do a little study about rest and what's the definition of rest. And of course, there's some dictionary definitions, but I really, really liked one that was from Graham Cook. And he says, rest is the act of quietly and confidently allowing yourself to be in the presence of God. Rest is an absence of work or worry, fear, or even performance. Rest empowers you to learn from Jesus how to be with God in all areas of your life. Resting is about opening yourself up to who God is for you and receiving all that he wants you to have in your life and circumstances. I want to read that last sentence again. I like that one. Resting is about opening yourself up to who God is for you. That's very personal. And receiving all that he wants you to have in your life and circumstances. Resting is a gift from God. Resting in God is a critical part of receiving. How can you really receive anything from him if you're always moving, always doing, and always stressed out? Are you really hearing from God? No. In the Bible, we've learned about the Sabbath. You've heard about the Sabbath, which was a day of rest. And when Pastor Mac has taught about rest, he talked about the Sabbath being a principle and not a law. The Old Covenant did require it to be observed on a particular day, but that's no longer the case. We saw the act of Jesus healing somebody on the Sabbath. And so the principle of rest is seen throughout the entire Bible, Old Testament and New Testament. We shouldn't feel bad about resting. I was not feeling fabulous on Saturday, and my husband was in super beast mode, out in the yard and installing a new light, and he was just go, go, go. And I'm just sitting on the couch and I kind of walked out to the yard. I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't feel very good. I wish I could be out there helping you. And he's like, oh my goodness. He's like, you had a long, busy week, just rest. And I was reminding myself of, my sermon. I'm like, why do I feel guilty for resting? And it just goes back to this whole thing in culture and society. Do. Achieve, achieve, achieve. I almost feel like I have to convince you that it's okay and that God is in support of it. And so rest is a promise, just like there's a whole bunch of other promises in the Bible, and we usually want to obtain those promises, and we need to grab hold of this same promise. Psalm 46:10, you guys know this one. Be still and know that I am God. That rolls off our tongues probably all the time. Do we really live that way? Ugh. I'm teaching myself. I've come a long way in this last year, but if you read that same verse from the Passion Translation, it says, surrender your anxiety, be silent and stop your striving, and you will see that I am God. So get quiet, quit your striving, and I'm going to show up, is basically what he's saying. I wanted to take a moment and talk about physical rest. So if I were to ask everybody, how many hours of sleep do you get a night? Most of us, not enough. Most of us, not enough. A lot of people have sleep issues, and sleep is what God created for us to reset, to refresh, to rebuild. And once again, if you read about what not having enough sleep does to your body, it's not good. It increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, obesity, high blood pressure, stroke, diabetes. It affects our hormone production, and it leads to early death. And I don't think we really appreciate how important physical rest is, and I think it's another reason that we are not well in our bodies and that our healing lines are so long, because we tend to sacrifice our physical rest for all of our doing, right? Go, go, go. Write more papers, get more degrees, run more marathons, I don't know, fill in the blank for what applies to you. And so people are getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night. That was not how we were created. And so we got to be practical and basic, and me to tell you, you all need to make sleep a priority in your life. Do you make very good decisions when you're overly tired? Do you make healthy food choices? No, it kind of has this trickle-down effect, right? Because we eat like crap because we feel like crap, and then we drink more coffee and whatever it might be. It's not a healthy cycle. And if you were to wake up feeling refreshed, having some sleep, you'd be amazed what it can do for you. Another thing I wanted to share about rest, that's your sleep lecture, but is about a term called soaking. Have you ever heard that word, soaking? Soaking. It's an intentional coming into God's presence. The key word there is an intentional. That means you have to do it. And when we take time for soaking, we learn how to receive and respond to who God is. We get to switch off our soul that's going crazy, our mind, our feelings are going crazy. We get to switch off our soul and sit quietly just in our spirit man. And that's where we become refreshed, and that's where we become energized, and that's where God speaks to us about what he would have for us next. And maybe he shares, a vision or a promise. If you go way back to week 1, when I kind of shared my whole story about my process of just realizing some things about myself and what was necessary in order for me to be well in all areas of my life, it was about a year ago when all it was stirring with me. And so I had just when the Lord said, do you want to get well? And it hit me like a ton of bricks that he was speaking to me. I was in the shower. I hear lots of things in the shower. I don't know why. And I realized that he was speaking to me, and it just became so clear at that moment. And so tears started to just run down my face, and all this revelation started to come because I was seeking it. I was looking for it. I was listening for it. And everything, I was just taking it in. And I was taking the time to just be with him, just for a short amount of time. And so I went that morning, I told you guys this, and I went and I sat out on my front porch, and it was raining pretty hard, and the Lord told me to just go out there and sit and rest, and I had some worship music on. And I was instantly distracted with doing, because the second I sat down on the porch, I saw a weed in the landscaping. And so my brain says, it will just take 30 seconds to go pull that weed, and then you can go back to what God told you to do. And that was my pattern. I'm just going to unload the dishwasher, and then I'll go read my devotional. I'm just going to get this load of laundry going, and then I'll sit down and be quiet with the Lord. And so that was a pattern for me. And so I sat there and I realized that, and I'm like, it took everything in me not to pull that weed and go, no, God, your priority over the weed. The weed will be there later. I can pull the weed later. I choose you first. And that was so hard. It sounds so stupid, I know, but it was so hard. And so I was instantly drawn to that doing. And so I sat there, and he had me just watch the rain. And I watched it soak the grass. I watched it soak the leaves. I watched it soak my bushes. And I'm just looking at it. I'm like, they're not fretting. They're not trying to do something, accomplish something, perform something, achieve something. The bushes and the grass just let the rain soak them. And so I realized that I needed to, I don't know if it was learn or relearn, how to soak. And so he said to me, go out in the rain. And I'm like, I just did my hair and just got in the shower. So I, had another argument. Do you all reason and argue with God? Okay, thanks. Good. I'm like, I just did my hair. My hair's going to get all wet. My clothes are going to get all wet, And so I obeyed, and I walked out into my front yard, and it was raining really hard, and I just went like this. And I will admit I was very distracted, because I'm like, what are the neighbors going to think? What about when the car drives by? Here's this crazy lady out in the front yard in the rain. And I just had to be honest with myself and go, I really don't think I'm going to get what I need to get by standing in the front yard. So I went to the backyard where there were trees and bushes and nobody could see me, and I could just surrender. A year later, I probably now could go stand in the front yard and it wouldn't be an issue, but where I was at a year ago, I couldn't. And so I literally got soaked. I probably stood in the rain for 10 minutes. I still had my phone in my back pocket playing worship music, and I just got physically soaked, but I soaked in his presence, and I worshiped. And I guess he needed to show me that literal experience, so I could understand it in my spirit. And so if we want to enter into God's rest, if we want to obtain that promise, we have to learn to soak. And this is what the Bible says, why it says we labor to enter into rest, because it takes diligent effort to slow down, to quit doing, and just be with him. We will get all our answers to everything if we will just be with him.